Other utensils that people would have liked to have to organise their liquids and their food would be tinware. So the travelling tinsmith working by the roadside would produce very inexpensive tin billy cans and water containers and milk containers for carrying liquids and milk around the place and holding it, and cups as well. And they were very shiny when they were new, but eventually this silvery shine wore off as they were polished, and they would just become rusty, and they were almost disposable in the long run. They didn't last long. If you didn't have tinware, you'd have jugs as well, made of coarse earthenware, which I just explained about. This coarse earthenware jugs or pitchers would be essential for collecting water from the spring or the well, and organising it in a house that didn't have running water. So pitchers were important too, and they very often just had glaze on the inside, like the crocks, and the glaze just went up to the top and no more. So moving on to other objects that you might have had in your single room cabin, you probably would have had furniture made of straw. Straw was a byproduct of the harvest and was relatively inexpensive, and all sorts of people were able to plait it to make into mattresses. So you have plaited straw mattresses, which are sort of about as thick as a futon, if you like, and they would be appropriate for a mattress in an outshot, for an organised sort of a bed, or there were whole seats made of plaited straw or coiled and bound straw. So there's two methods of making straw seats: coiling and binding, which uses bramble as a sort of stitching material to stitch one coil to the next, or plaiting, which is a much coarser method, which we can see in these pictures. And then something else you would want to have, rather than having your tinware or your noggins or anything on the floor where the animals might damage them, you'd want to wash them up and put them on a tin rail or a tin rack or a cup rack. And sometimes they were simply just little sticks sticking at 45 degrees out of the wall or out of a wooden board. So a couple of photographs of those still surviving right up to the late 1980s, when I was doing field work, knocking on doors all over Ireland. I came across these still in very traditional houses. So I'd suggest that the poor man's dresser would have been this little tin rack, which was a kind of a drainer as well as displaying things at the same time. And then if you were one step up from having your communal meal out of a basket, you would probably aspire to something that also saved timber and saved space simultaneously, which is the falling table. And the falling table is clever because it actually, we discovered that it was used in every county of Ireland, had various different names: the falling leaf table, the falling table, the drop table, etc. But it was hinged against the wall. It came down with two hinges and a hinged single leg, and then when it wasn't needed, it would go flat up against the wall again. So it saved all the four legs. You just needed one. You didn't need all the superstructure around the edge of the table as well, and you could just get rid of it when you didn't need it. So it was a brilliant way of saving space and timber. So the falling table is something which is very appropriate, and it's reproduced in Balmratty Folk Park. They have a single room dwelling there, which is moved from County Mayo. It has a little outshot bed, and it has a falling table inside as you go in. So that is a reproduction falling table. They're extraordinarily rare now, and you came across one in situ in all the fieldwork I did in the late 1980s, only one in County Kilkenny. So this is a reproduction one, but they're quite easy to reproduce, and they're very interesting, very good space savers. Finally, it's interesting to look at painters who came to the west of Ireland in a group, some English and Irish painters who came together, called Alfred Downing Fripp, Topham, Goodall, who was Irish, and Mark Antony. And these four men came and painted in Galway repeatedly. They came back several times, and they liked to paint reality rather than fantasy, if you like. They weren't dressing up their models. They liked to go into cabins and paint what they saw. And there's this extraordinary watercolour by Fripp which shows the potato skib symbolically empty in the foreground of a poor cabin, which is a fisherman's cabin, and he's trying to tell his audience in the 1840s that this family was very hungry, and his way of saying that with the authentic objects was to put the skib empty in the middle of the floor. So an empty skib means an empty belly in his artistic license. And it's also significant that there's no pot over the fire in this painting as well. So there's various different paintings done by this group of artists, and they're fantastically important now to look back on this time. And he's also got a dresser in that cabin with an empty shelf right in the middle, which is quite an alarming thing. It's really something that you don't see. A dresser with nothing on a shelf is again telling us about poverty and lack of material objects. So that's very, very interesting. Alfred Downing Fripp worked with Topham, who did the painting of the communal meal and the pig in and the potatoes in the middle. So when they visited, these people would go back to England and they would leave their painting materials with somebody that they became friendly with in Galway, who was called Reverend Rooney. And he was a priest who decided to take up painting, and he was a good painter actually. He was so good that he exhibited a few paintings between I think 1844 and 1847 at the Royal Hibernian Academy in Dublin. And he also used symbolism to express this terrible tragedy that was unfolding in Galway, particularly where he worked. So his painting called Sympathy shows a woman who stops spinning and she's looking down, I think probably her daughter, who's holding a dead bird in front of her, and they're both looking very sad. So Rooney is using this painting to express the sorrow of the parishes that had so many people die. You know, the dead bird symbolises that death, and the child looking at it symbolises her own lost future. So Rooney's paintings are really fascinating, picking up on these visiting artists and using painting as a way of expressing his sympathy for what was going on at that time.